Winnie and I came here about a year and, a couple months ago. And so just to tell you a little bit about our story, we moved to Texas 5 years ago and moved from California, right? We're one of those. There's a lot in the room. And we joined a phenomenal church, fantastic church. You all know what it is. You know who the pastor is, and you probably watch him online. Fantastic church. But for 4 years, and I was ministered to deeply by his ministry, right? But we did this thing every year at the end of the year. My wife's really good at making sure it happens. At the end of the year, we force our kids to pray and write down things that God wants to do different the next year, right? They roll their eyes. Oh, my gosh. Oh, please don't. Can we just play video games? And sometimes I even feel that way. She makes us do it. It's good. And so I'm a believer in resolutions, right? I am. I know people make fun of them, but I just think it's good to is that you, Lord? Am I good? All right, cool. And about a year and a couple months ago, God said you need to get connected in community. You need to get back into a place where you're ministering, you're helping, you're being ministered to, there's a real connection. See, we had gone and sat in church for 4 years and been ministered to. It's good, don't get me wrong. But how many of you know that's not church? Right? I could probably do and I don't mean to demean the ministry there. It's phenomenal ministry. But for me, I wasn't connected. And so I'm so grateful for this community. We came home, we searched online, Spirit-Filled Church and Prosper. We found a yellow website and showed up here. The yellow church is what my daughter called it. So what'd you think? She's like, you mean the yellow church? I'm like, yes. Tyler's good at marketing. The yellow church. But here's the thing. God designed us to be connected in community for a reason, right? Church is not a spectator sport. And really what we've done in America, when you look at Tyler mentioned some of the messages we have, right? That we've turned the gospel into a ticket to get out of hell and into heaven. We've turned the gospel into that. And then we've turned church into something you come and watch on the weekends, right? That's not what God has called us to. That's not the purest picture of what the church is. Now, I'm not trying to criticize people, right? That's not my heart. My heart for us is that we walk in the fullness of what God has for us. That's my heart, because that's his heart. And that's what's stirring inside of Vincent. You see, it's almost difficult for him to get it out because it's so stirring. And he's like, God, take me into the wilderness. You understand what that means, right? God, take me to a place where I'm hungry. In Deuteronomy 8, it talks about when God led Israel, he led them into the desert, and he said, I led you there so that you might hunger, so that you might know that man does not live on bread alone, but he lives on every word that comes out of the mouth of the Lord. That's what that means. But you've got to be led to the wilderness, and you've got to hunger for it, right? And that's what's burning inside of them, for something more. And that only happens in community as we journey together. And today what I want to do, and so basically I'm grateful to be here. But today what I want to share with you about is about Abraham. And Tyler will attest to this. I sent him like 4,000 verses and realized this is probably like 6 weeks of content. So forget this. Let's just talk about the beginning. And I want to start in Genesis 12. So if you don't mind throwing that up, Genesis 12, 1 through 9. That's our scripture we'll read together. And you know what? We always stand together when we read, so let's read. So just bear with me. It's a little bit long. It's not real long, but it's a little bit long, but we'll get through it, and then we'll talk through some things. Okay, and it says this. So he's Abram at this point. He's not Abraham. And this is in Genesis 12, and it says this. Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that, there's a reason, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and here it is, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. This is what God called Israel to. So Abram went. Man, I want his heart. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old. I'm only 46. It's not too late. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. I have no idea if I'm saying these places right, but just bear with me. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east to the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And I think that's a beautiful picture. We probably won't have time to touch on it. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb. Okay, you can be seated. Thank you. So Abraham's the father of our faith, right? You guys ever in Sunday school sing that song, Father Abraham? How many sons? Some of you are like young and you're like, what's Sunday school? So, man, I grew up in Southern Baptist, boy. I grew up in Sunday school. All right? He's the father of our faith, right? And so Abraham's call is our call. And sometimes when you look at Israel, there's this perception that like Israel was God's great experiment and it didn't work, so he sent Jesus. And there's a new covenant now, right? That's not what happened. God forever, when you look at the history of his interactions with humanity, has been working out a redemptive plan that calls people out of this world into his promises to bring about redemption for the world. That's the story. That's the story. So, brief history of time, catch you up. Genesis 12. If you haven't read Genesis, it's the first book of the Bible, right? That's why I call it Genesis means start. That's how I remember it. So this is real easy. Brief history of time. Genesis 1, 2, 3. God in Genesis 1 creates the universe, right? Genesis 2, he creates man and woman in the Garden of Eden, and he gives them purpose, and he walks with them. It's a beautiful picture of a spiritual world and a natural world in perfect unison, right? That's the plan. That's what he's doing. We don't see this again until you read Revelations, right? Genesis 3 is the last time you see this, Genesis 2 is the last time you see this in perfection. There's two things in the garden. There's a tree of everlasting life, and there's a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so God has this beautiful plan, but he says to man, look, there's a tree over there, because he wants us to have free will. And that tree represents the crisis of humanity, the knowledge of good and evil. When I was young, I was like, why'd they eat that apple? Why? Right? We don't know if it's an apple, but whatever it was, right? The knowledge of good and evil, though, that's humanity's disease. You see, humanity desires to exalt himself and create his own values and to place himself in the seat of God. That's what humanity desires. Just look at the world over and over again. That's the crisis of humanity. That's what Satan did. You say, well, if I just saw God, I wouldn't do that. He saw him clearly. He still did it. Right? Adam and Eve saw him clearly. They still did it. That's the crisis of humanity, and that's the choice that God puts before us. Not because he wants evil, he doesn't. Right? He's got a beautiful plan that he invites you in, but that's the crisis of humanity, is we want to exalt ourselves to be God. That's what we want to do. And so we want to invent ourselves, want to create our own morality, we want to define ourselves. That's humanity. So the fall comes, right? And what's God's response to the fall? He pursues man. He pursues Adam. And he tries to fix this deal, right? So that's Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Genesis 4, Cain and Abel, right? You've got two brothers. One offers something, first fruit, right? He takes first fruit. So it's this picture of him depending on God. His source is God. That's the picture, right? He takes his first fruit, the first thing that comes. This is his livelihood. And he says, God, I sacrifice this to you because you are my sustenance. This is a picture of not human kingdom, but God's kingdom. Not human exaltation, but God exaltation. That's the picture. Cain, he worships the work of his hands, basically. Right? It doesn't put it in those words, but that's what he does. The fruit of the ground comes, and over time, there's some left over. He takes it to God, and for some weird reason, God rejects it, right? It's because it's some left over, and it's the exaltation of the fruit of your hands, and you bring it to God. And then God says to him, hey, Cain, now listen, I want you to live a different way, but if you don't, sin is crouching at your door. And you guys know the story. He murders his brother. He lives under a curse for eternity. Human kingdom. That's the problem, right? That's 4. 5, bunch of descendants. Okay, that one's easy. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is Noah. And Tyler just talked about it. This is humanity being humanity. And it builds a society full of debauchery, murder, hatred, self-worship, and it's destructive. That's humanity being humanity. That's the story. And then God has a remnant. Tyler told the story, right? That's 6 to 10. 11, Tower of Babel. Remember the story in Sunday school? They built a tower to heaven. I was like, why is that so bad? You guys remember that's what your Sunday school taught you too? They're building a tower to heaven. It's like, really? Like, what were they? That's what they're doing? That's really not what they're doing. So, verse 4, let us build a tower with its top in the heavens, kind of. And let us make a name for ourselves. There's the intent. Let us make a name for ourselves. And listen why. Lest we be dispersed among the whole earth. Remember what God said to Adam? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Right? Remember what he said to Noah? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And they said, let us build a tower into the heavens, exalt ourselves, lest we do what God said. That's humanity. Chapter 12, Abram. That's a brief history of time. Right? He's the father of our faith. He gets called out of this. Now, up until this time, this is all we know about him, is that God came in and spoke to him. We know that his father and his house were idol worshipers. We know that because it tells us that in Joshua 24. That's all we know. So you've got this guy. God appears on the scene. From what we know, he doesn't know much about God. God calls him and he goes. But here's the thing. He's called to leave. He's called out of something. He's called into something. And that's your call. That's my call. I'm called out of something and into something. And what he's called out of, 3 things, right? Country, kindred, and his father's home. To me, that is culture, identity, right? We have a lot of identity wrapped up in our family, and inheritance. You're called out of those 3 things, and the human nature seeks these 3 things for itself, and God says there's a better way. Come out of these things. Why? I want to bless you. And the blessing is for a purpose. This is not a prosperity gospel, although you might prosper. All right? So that all the families of the world might be blessed. See, God wants to put a blessing on Chris and Krista. He wants to put a blessing on them that's so powerful that it leaks out and impacts his workplace. When he goes to work, light shines from him, and it's a dark place, and the goodness of God and the blessing on his life pours out into his work, and his colleagues are touched by it. That's powerful. That's the blessing, right? That's what God has for Chris and Krista. That's what they're called into. And we've dumbed this down to this story about getting out of hell. No wonder people are leaving. Well, I just can't stop cussing, so I guess I'll just maybe stop the day before I die. Right? That's a terrible story. That's not the Bible. The Bible is so much more than that. Come out of your country, your kindred, and your father's house into something more beautiful, to the place I will show you, and it's a journey. The day you don't come out and camp slightly outside the city and say, God, please, I don't want to do anything bad, please. No, it's so much more beautiful than that. People have this impression that Christians get saved out of the fun and we just have to be miserable so we're happy again when we get to heaven. No, the fun and the joy and the blessing is in the journey. That's where it is. But we've been told this gospel that's short-sighted and short-lived, and it's weak, and it's not full of God's goodness, and so it's kind of boring. And it's not the gospel. It's not what Abraham was called into. He's the father of our faith. It's not what he was called into. And so you got the backdrop. So Abraham, He grew up in Mesopotamia, Ur of the Chaldeans. Mesopotamia is credited with being the first great city. So again, here's the picture. Humanity at its height, humanity's having its way, and God says, come out from that. Come out from your culture. So listen, if you're a believer or if you're processing this deal, you're called out of your culture. Culture is something in our lives that starts at birth, but it's developed, right? Like most of us grew up in America. Not all of us, but most of us. So we're American, right? Maybe grew up in Texas, so you're Texan, right? Amen. The promised land. Abram had his promised land. America has theirs. It's called Texas, all right? So, but that impacts your culture, and culture is a deep thing, right? I remember, for those of you who don't know, I spent 7 years in Taiwan. That's where I met my lovely wife. All right, that's where part of my inheritance was. Oh, yeah. So, but when I went, I remember they taught us about culture, and they said, hey, and they tried to sort of frame it. I grew up in Altus, Oklahoma on a farm, okay? So it's like, the world's different. I'm like, it is? Like, I'm on a plane to Taiwan, ni hao. What ni hao? Like, I have no idea what any of this is, right? I'm just like, and this is back in the days when when you got on the plane, your parents walked you to the door and let you in. This is different. I didn't have Google. I didn't have Ni Hao Kai Lan. It's very different. So I didn't know much about culture. It's very different. And pretty soon after I was there, I remember when I was sleeping, and this noise wakes me up. It takes a lot to wake me up. Just ask my wife. It takes a lot to wake me up. And the houses in Taiwan, or at least where I was, very congested and tight, right? Very big cities, alleyways, and the house I lived in, you walked out the front door and you're in the street. Like you step off the cars, right? So it's that close. It's that congested. So I'm on the second floor and this noise is happening. I walk out on the balcony. It's 2 a.m. And this is what I see. And you just tell me what you think. So I walk out kind of dazed and confused, and I see a bonfire in the middle of the alleyway, okay? I see about 12 people around the bonfire in white hoods and capes. And I'm like, the clans in Taiwan? Who do they hate here? Is it white people? I'm like freaked out, man. Well, I found out it's just a funeral. It's not the Klan. 2 a.m. funeral, what? So it's a Taoist funeral. At 2 a.m. the next day, the guy I was living with, he's like, "Do you hear the funeral last night?" I'm like, "That's a funeral?" Culture is interesting, right? I've got a buddy who moved from South Africa. So Nico, you can relate to this guy. But he's a pastor out in California, but he had just moved here. And Americans, our culture, one thing we're really good at is lining up. We're so good at lining up. You travel the world, we're probably one of the best. We get in line and we wait, right? And so he goes to this gas station to gas up his car. He's just got here. And there's a bunch of cars there with no one in them. And there's a long line. And that's confusing to him. It's because people went in to pay, if you're American. So he thinks, well, there's a bunch of gas pumps with no one using them, and I can probably squeeze my Jeep in there. So he pulls in and backs up. And he just puts his debit card in and he starts gassing. He's gassing away, and all of a sudden he hears this guy yelling, "What's up, Holmes?" And he's gassing. And this guy yells it about 3 times. He turns around, and there's this big Latino guy, right? And his white tats. And he's walking, "What's up, Holmes?" And he's like, "Dude, this Holmes dude is about to get jacked up." So the guy walks up, and he's mad. He's dropping some F-bombs and some other bombs. I don't know if you're allowed to say F-bombs, but I did. Hey. And he got right up to him. He's like, "Holmes, what's up, man?" And he's like, "Are you talking to me?" And he said, "Yes." He's like, "My name's not Holmes." I'm not sure how he survived. But culture determines our values and the way we behave. You understand that? Well, you need to adopt a kingdom culture. I need to adopt a kingdom culture, and it needs to grow. That's part of it. It grows. It starts at birth. Jesus, save me, and then it has to grow, right? My kingdom culture today is better than it was the day I said yes to Jesus. It should be, and it better be better tomorrow, right? I got to keep walking. Culture, and then your identity, right? Your identity. When let me just brag on my wife real quick. When she came to Christ, she was the only one in her family, right? And understand that in Taiwan, it's to some degree, and probably still today, it's somewhat disgraceful to become a Christian because their religion and their background is wrapped up in animism and ancestral worship, right? So you kind of deny your ancestors when you do that, right? But when she became a Christian, she did it in a very authentic way. She became a Christian. She made an announcement, and her family knew, that she was a believer, and she changed her life. She's a different person, right? Her grandfather became a Christian. She's the first one in her family. Her grandfather had been going to church, but he became a Christian right before he died. We had the privilege of leading him to Christ to some degree, I think. Like he was going to church. He was confused about the gospel, and he was very sick towards the end. We led him to Christ, and he said, "Give me a Christian funeral. I want a Christian funeral." Is what he told Wendy, and so he passed, and Wendy fought her dad. And because those of you who know Wendy's dad, he's a believer now. Her whole family is Christians now. It's phenomenal. That's the story, right? Not to spoil the end, but she was adamant about having this Christian funeral for him, and it was very hard for us because we didn't know what to do. They said, "Okay, Brandon, Christian funeral, you do it." I'm like, "I don't know what to do. This is like 30-day funeral. I already told you what the funerals are like that I saw before. I don't know. Bonfire. I don't know." So we made one up. Our church was young, and they hadn't had funerals. They're like, "I don't know what to do." So we made stuff up. But the point is, through that process, her sister, not during the funeral, but became a Christian very soon after. Because she decided to come out of her culture, of her kindred. You understand what I'm saying? She made the decision to come out from it, and it bore fruit. And so her sister became a Christian. And then her dad, and a long time later, but her dad became a Christian, right? And then her other sisters kind of a Christian. But there's a fruit of the gospel in her family because she decided to come out. So God's called you to come out. And it's a powerful thing, right? And then inheritance. Did you know you have a spiritual inheritance? Bigger than, well, I don't know if it's bigger than heaven. It can't be bigger than heaven. That's not what I mean. Prior to heaven. Can I say it that way? Yes. Come on. You have a spiritual inheritance prior to heaven that's meant that's meant for you to go and discover, obtain, and realize. And if we buy into a gospel that's a very simple ticket to heaven, it's not even in there. Do you understand what I'm saying? God has so much more for you. He's got so much more for you. So here's the thing. 2 things about leaving and making change. Number 1, it's not easy, right? It's not easy. Abram was 75 years old. It's not easy to change at 75. I'm 46. It's not easy to change at 46, okay? I remember when I became a Christian, it's not easy, it's not practical, and it's not convenient, right? That's a typical thing around change. When I became a Christian, Tyler was saying, think back when you became a Christian. It's very clear to me when I became a Christian. I had experiences when I was young, but I left God and I wasn't walking with him. When I was 20 years old, I have a buddy who I stopped talking to him because he had become a Christian. I don't want anything to do with it. Don't talk to me about it, right? I had a friend who said, "Do you believe in God?" And I thought, if I say yes, it doesn't make sense because my life is, I don't believe in God. I can't if I'm acting this way, so I guess not. So he calls me up and he says, I'm going to be out your way. I want to see you. I haven't seen you in forever. And we had stopped talking because he was a Christian now. So I agreed to go with him. Well, he tricks me into going to this worship service. He's like, "Hey, before we go have a coffee, I want to go to this worship service to see, just for a minute. Is that cool?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Yes. Fine. All right, let's go. So we get out of the car and he's like, "Just for a minute, okay?" I'm like, "Okay." So we walk up to this church. There's a breezeway. 2 doors, right? Double doors like ours. Somebody opens he walks in before me and then grabs the second door for me. I hit the breezeway and the presence of God is so thick. There's tears coming down my face. So I remember. And he looks at me and he's like, "Are you okay? What's going on?" 30 seconds prior, I was mad that we were there. But I did business with God that night, and I wrestled. I didn't know if I could change. That was my wrestle. And I told God, I don't know if I can be different. You know, I'm out doing this, I'm doing that. The guys I live with, they all party. Nobody knows. I don't know any Christians in my city. I don't know if I can be It's not convenient. It's not easy. But it's worth it. And I made the decision that night to be different. And that started the journey, okay? Here's the second part. Leaving is never easy, practical, or convenient. The second part is that blessing only begins when you decide to leave and take action. He says, I will bless you, and through you bless all nations, right? That's the call. But if we don't leave, thank you. You guys just edit this before it goes on YouTube. If we don't leave, then we don't experience the blessing, right? If we don't leave, we don't experience the blessing. That's not me, is it? And so my question is, what is God calling you to leave today? Here's the thing. It's not just for the new Christian. This is a continual process, right, of understanding what God has for us. You're called out of your old culture, your old identity, and your old natural inheritance, and into something way, way more beautiful. Now, I've talked a little bit about the tragedy of the modern gospel, right? It creates an ineffective, unfruitful Christianity. 2 Peter 1:3-8 says this. Listen to this. It says, his divine power has granted us all things that pertain to life and godliness. All things. All things. His divine power has granted. You understand the tense, right? Has granted all things. It's been done that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him. So you've got knowledge of him. He's granted all things. And you have that, right? So did the people that Peter was writing to. Of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he granted to us precious and very great promises. Okay, look, promises. If I tell Tyler I promise to be here today, like right now I say, Tyler, I promise to be at church today. He's like, what are you talking about? You're already here. Promises are future. So this has been done, but there's also promises. You understand? So that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature. You've got to engage the promises so you can become a partaker. Having escaped from the corruption that is in the world, having come out, right, of Mesopotamia, you've come out, but now it's time to go in because of sinful desire. Now, he says this, for this reason, make every effort. We're not saved by works, but we are called to make every effort. Right? Not to earn his love. You've already got that. But you have an inheritance that takes a bit of effort. You understand? Getting out of the bed in the morning and praying and listening takes effort. Right? Make every effort. That's what Peter says. For this reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue. Right? And virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness, and there's a lot in here, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with brotherly love. And then he says this, for if these qualities are yours and are this is an if-then statement, okay? If these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being, listen, ineffective and unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Did you know you could be ineffective and unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ? Did you know that? I knew it because I've done it. You can be ineffective and unfruitful in the knowledge of Jesus Christ. You're called into, that's not what you're called into. You're called into fruitfulness, into effectiveness. That's what you're called into. But if we're going to get there, we've got a journey. See, Abraham was called out onto a journey, and really I was going to talk a lot about the journey, and I haven't even got to the journey. But culture and identity is developed on the journey. See, he walked 400 to 700 miles just to go to Canaan and be told this is where I'm going to give you this land. And then he kept walking. He went down back to Egypt. His journey, read those 10 chapters, 12 to 22-ish. Read about his life. His journey's just begun, right? So here's a couple things. The journey's long. We're like, God, save me. Oh, Lord, wait, what's happening? Wait, what? My life's not perfect? Wait, what? Dude was 75 years old, went on a 400 to 700-mile walk. That's from here to Corpus Christi and a little further. Anybody? Let's go. No. The journey is long, right? The nature of a journey is long. Listen to this. He was 75 years old when he was called. You guys know his story, right? He was 86 years old when he had Ishmael. It's already been 11 years. And Ishmael's not where he got it right, right? He's 99 years old the next time God talks to him about Isaac. He's 100 years old when he has Isaac. And then when he goes to follow God through that process of where he, the sacrifice of Isaac, scholars, and I'm not sure when this happened, but they think Isaac's somewhere between 13 and 34 years old. So he's about 125 years old-ish. 75 to 125, the journey's still going, and it's at 125 that he gets the Jehovah-Jireh revelation. You understand? His identity is still developing at 125 years old, and his culture is still changing radically and drastically at 125 years old, so that his fruitfulness and effectiveness and the knowledge of what God has for him can be bigger and broader and wider at that age. God has a journey for you. You understand what I'm saying? He's got a journey for you and a promise for you, an inheritance for you. And he wants to develop a culture in you and in your family. And he wants you to have a new identity. And yes, it's birthed at Christ, but this journey is what's going to really develop it. Let's journey with him. Does that make sense? And so this journey is such a powerful, powerful thing. Now, the second thing, which I'm not going to get to because we got to stop, is that the journey is full of tests and challenges. It's full of tests and challenges. Just like what we started off with Deuteronomy, right? Led you into the desert so that you might know. See, God could have told them, hey, let's go. Canaan, let's go. Canaan, over here. Okay, we're here. Oh, guys, listen. Man doesn't live on bread alone. Let's go. Right? And they would have heard it from God and said, oh, yeah, man doesn't live on bread alone. But it wouldn't have become part of their culture because they didn't experience it and journey it. And so the journey is long and hard, and it's full of tests and challenges. Sometimes you mistake the test for God's not in this. He's often in the test, right? And we want to turn back and go back to Egypt because it's hard. But we don't understand that there's new revelation, new culture, a new identity, and new inheritance on the other side of the test. And it's a powerful thing. If you look at Abraham's life, there's about 8 different key moments that and so obviously we're not going to get to these. Don't worry, there's not 8 more points before we quit. But go read these and look at how does he respond? What does God say to him at the end of it? What's the revelation? Does it move him forward or not? There's a lot to learn through this about our journey. But here's the thing. God has you on a faith journey. He has me on a faith journey. I want to share just real briefly, if I can. I hope we've only got a few minutes, and so we'll see what happens. In 2000, and I'm going to sound old here because I start putting off dates. So 2007, God had me and Wendy move back to America. And we didn't know this at the time. We were coming to join a church. And this is part of my journey that I want to share with you because it impacted me in a very large way. And I'm just getting on the other side of it. And I want to encourage you no matter where you're at in your journey, okay? We didn't know it at the time. We were coming on eldership at a church there. That's why we went. But the church was going through a church split. And we didn't know it. We really weren't even involved in that. Like it wasn't our history. Does that make sense? But in the midst of that process, not saying who's right, who's wrong, probably a lot of people were wrong, I made a decision to step out of eldership and to get mad. So, Now, I didn't leave God totally. I didn't start building golden calves and hang them above my fireplace. I didn't renounce Christianity. I didn't do any of that. But what we did is we bounced around from church to church for a while. I complained a lot. And when we finally settled in a church in California, I told the pastor, he's a friend of mine, I told him we're going to come, but I don't want to be on leadership, so don't ask me to. And if you need me to do something, just tell me and I'll do it. But I'm not really going to be part of this community. Held him at an arm's distance. He had a lot of grace for me because he knew where I was at. And then we moved to Texas, right? And hear me out. We're not, some of you are like, man, this dude's jacked up. We're praying. We're telling our kids about Jesus. We're worshiping God. Some of the things he's correcting, but he's being patient with us. You understand? Like, we're not, God, I'm out. I hate it. That's not what happened. But I did stop journeying. I let my journey stop to some degree in this piece of my life. You understand? Last year, when we read Driven by Eternity, the men's group, you guys know if you were in the group when we read that, I was like wrecked by this book. And it was just talking about dying and going to heaven and giving account for the way you were living. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that because of where I'm at. That church split happened in 2008. We read that book in 2022. No matter where you're at on your journey, last week in men's group, we talked in Romans where it says that the calling and the gifts are irrevocable, right? And Tyler shared on how you can't just live however you want. You can't. The journey gets clogged. But they're still irrevocable. And so over the last 6 months, for Wendy and I, God has my yes. Like he hasn't had it in 13 years. I'm not perfect, but I desire him more. And I'm trying to find his direction in my life. And I'm saying, God, anything. You want me to move back to Taiwan? I'll go. I don't know if he wants that. I'll go. You want me to quit my job? Do whatever. I'll do it. What do you want? And I'm not being haphazard. I talked to my wife about it. She's in agreement. I talked to my parents about it because I respect my parents. I called Tyler. I said, come to my house. This is what's happening. And so I'm walking this deal out. Here's my point. No matter where you're at on your journey, maybe you stopped halfway, right? There's always time to reconnect, re-engage, get reignited in this process because God's not done with you yet. You understand? And so today, maybe it's a place where you feel maybe you've never started this journey, right? Or maybe you feel there's small areas. Maybe it's not as big as mine. Maybe it's a small area. You're like, I need to do X, Y, Z. I know there's more. Even if you're doing it all right, I know there's more, right? And so what I want to do real briefly, because we've only got like 5 minutes, I want to invite you to do this real quick. Take out your phone real fast and take a selfie. No, that's not what we're doing. Okay, take out your phone real fast. Open a notes app. Whatever the app is on Android, I don't know. Because here's the thing, God's saying something to us. Let's document it, let's process it, right? And we're just gonna spend like just 1 minute here. And I just want you to close your eyes and ask God that question. What are you calling me out of, God? And what are you calling me into? And I'm not gonna ask people to read it. This is for you. Okay? Maybe he's already put something in your heart, in your mind, as I've been talking, or this morning when Vincent prayed, or when we did worship, whatever. What is God calling you out of? What is he calling you into? Specifically, for me, it was he needs my yes. He needs me to be willing to do whatever he asks. He needs my heart again. Maybe it's something specific. Maybe you're a father in your home and you know God is calling you to be more intentional about reading the scripture with your children. That's just a simple example, but that's part of the journey, right? That's easy. But you need to, if that's what he's saying, you need to mark it down. Because Abram walked to Canaan, and then God said, this is what I'm giving you. You need to start, you need to take a step on the journey so he can show you more of your inheritance. So just as we sit here, take just a minute. Whatever he puts on your heart.